Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I am your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I have with me a very, very senior professional from Germany, Rolf Pfeiffer. Rolf, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Ashutosh, for having me.
Thank you. Rolf is the managing partner of Bernotat and CIE. He is a part of the executive and team mentoring. He was earlier with Arthur D. Little, Accenture, and CSL Behring. He's a fellow of the Institute of Coaching at McLean, an affiliate of Harvard Medical School. So, Rolf, let's start by talking about Bernotat and CIE, and then we can talk about coaching and mentoring. Tell me about this venture and the areas of executive mentoring that you focus on.
Of course, very happy to do that. So the company was started by a gentleman called Rolf Bernotat. That's where the name comes from.
Yep.
And he had a very accomplished career in corporate Germany. He was the CEO of one of the largest energy companies in Germany up until 2010. And upon his retirement from the CEO role, he started his own business with a view of bringing top-notch executive development to Germany and to German corporate leaders.
Yeah.
And the main focus there was to bring a form of development that he referred to and we keep referring to as executive mentoring. And I'm sure we're going to speak about what that really means in a moment. Now, sadly, Rolf Bernotat passed away in 2017. So we're just working to keep that spirit alive and prosper.
Wonderful. So let's talk about coaching and mentoring. And let me start by asking you, what made you become a coach or an executive coach?
Yeah. Well, it was in my executive role at CSL Behring, the pharmaceutical company, where we went through a major restructure. And we started to work with executive coaches so that they could work with some of the key executives, help them see the organization through that restructure, and basically establish a few new, more modern ideas around what leadership could look like in the organization. And I saw the work that these executive coaches did, and most importantly, I saw the results that they achieved with those executives. And I thought, well, I think this is what I would like to do as well. So that set me out on that course. And that was in 2006.
Wow. So you've been a coach for almost 15 years now. It's amazing. So let me ask you one of those small, basic questions for a lot of our viewers and listeners. And as I mentioned, we have a young profile of viewers and listeners. What is executive coaching and why has it become so relevant today?
Yeah, well, I guess there are many, many different words that come with the word coaching. There's life coaching and there is business coaching and obviously there is executive coaching. So it's very much focusing on working with executives in organizations, large and small. So they can be executives in very large organizations. They can also be executives in startups, people that have a responsibility for running a P&L, for formulating vision, for formulating and implementing strategy. And the idea of helping these individuals with those responsibilities is, I guess, the core idea of executive coaching, where I guess the rest of the explanation of what coaching is would apply there as well. It's a process that helps someone to fulfill their true potential. It's the process that helps someone to grow and to have a more effectiveness and a bigger impact. And it's a process that is meant to identify and enable those potentials that people have.
Interesting. So, when I was a young executive in India Tobacco, which is part of British American Tobacco 4 decades ago, coaching or mentoring was done either by a family elder or a senior executive who took a liking for you. Today, it's become a profession. I wanted to ask you, what is the difference between executive coaching and executive mentoring?
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess the difference is probably pretty subtle, and I'd like to make an analogy. So I pretend to play tennis. So this is, I play tennis, but I don't play very good tennis.
Yeah.
So you can give me a racket, you can put me on the court, and I can play with someone. I can swing the racket, I can get the ball to where it ought to be. So that's good. Someone who's been a very good tennis player will also have a racket and a ball on a court, and they will swing, but they will swing the racket differently. They will have a different type of experience. They may have a different type of perspective. So the executive coach will be able to identify and awaken potential. They will be able to work with very senior leaders very effectively. However, they may not have had the experience of sitting in those chairs themselves. So that's where the executive mentor comes in, who has a track record of having been in these roles, of having led organizations successfully, of having faster access to the questions that really matter. So it's like looking at an executive that we work with as mentors, like we would look at an investment opportunity. Should we invest in this person? Why should we invest in this person? And what's their license to operate? And the idea of having been in these types of roles usually gives us faster access to the questions that really matter. But we work with questions very much like coaches would work with questions. We may chime in more ideas. What we don't do, we never do, is tell our own hero stories, because no one's interested in them.
Interesting. And continuing with the mentoring, how is executive team mentoring so relevant today?
We see that most organizations are effectively led by teams. And you can, going back to a sports analogy, you can take any team sports. If you improve the capabilities of one player on the team, well, you certainly improve the capabilities of that one player. That player may have an impact on the quality of the entire team, but they may as well not have that impact. So the idea is focus on working with the entire team and help the entire team collectively to become stronger players, to understand how the dynamics between their members function, and as a result, how we can work on those dynamics and help them become a more effective, more coherent, more functional team. And as most businesses are run by teams, the focus on working with teams should be more prominent. And some organizations have understood that. Others will still have to discover that.
Well said. Well said. So one of the other questions, Rolf, that is often asked is that how long should a mentoring or a coaching relationship be for? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, the experience that we have had over the years is that anywhere between 6 and 12 months is probably the sweet spot. That's where you have the best balance of effort needed and impact created. There are people who argue that you can have a 2-hour session and that can have impact. Well, yes, of course. I'm not sure that will have lasting impact. So if we want to change habits, we need several repetitions. We need to be able to make experiments. We want people to have the opportunity of defining what they're going to do in their own environment after this particular session when they go back. We want to help them make those experiments, come back and talk about them, say, what has worked? What were the results? What hasn't worked? What else could you do? And then go back and iterate. And we know that it takes several iterations before a new habit really sticks. So that's where we say we need some time. And usually those between 6 to 12 months is a good duration.
Very interesting. And another question that is often asked, when I ask someone, how's your coach or how's your mentor? Either I'm told very good or, I'm not too sure. My question to you is, how does a mentee or a coachee figure out whether they have a good mentor or a coach?
Well, I'd like to take another example, the example of picking a restaurant that you want to go to.
Yeah.
Before you've been there, what can you do? You can certainly look at the menu, you can look at the website, you can look at all those websites that give you recommendations, and you can read what people write about the restaurant. But then, as they say in England, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. So at one point, you just have to go there and try for yourself. And I guess the truth is, you can get recommendations from people you trust, hoping that they will look for the same things in these people that you would look in these people. On the other hand, you can say, I want to understand that I'm being listened to. So if a coach, if a mentor listens to you, listens for understanding, not listen to respond, but listen to understand, that's a good sign of quality. If a coach, if a mentor is present, it is, I'm here with you, all the other channels are switched off. That's a good sign of quality. If that person helps you build your awareness for who you are and what you do and why, that's a good sign of quality. If they ask you questions that you haven't got ready-made answers for. So when someone says, hey, that's a brilliant question, I know that, well, they haven't got an answer. And that's a good sign. So I don't care whether the question was brilliant. If they haven't got an answer, I know that this is a good question that pushes the envelope. So those would be signs in a conversation that would give you an idea of whether this person probably is a good fit. And I mean, also, it's that idea of fit. Do I think? But there's an important sort of twist to that. We often call the initial conversation a chemistry call, and I'm torn between liking and not liking that label, because chemistry will suggest that we will probably get along well,
or we'll have an explosion.
However, or we'll have an explosion. However, is getting along well enough for an effective coaching relationship? Or am I going to allow the other person to challenge me, to put me outside of my comfort zone? So I think I prefer good fit conversation to chemistry, but really the idea ought to be, will this person be able to challenge me to help me grow? And will I feel comfortable with the idea that this person will challenge me? So obviously there's a degree of trust that's needed that has to be established bilaterally.
Correct. The other question that often comes up is on culture. How do you think culture impacts executive mentoring or executive coaching?
That's a brilliant question that we could spend hours discussing.
I agree with you.
So, if culture is the sum of the answers that we give to the large and small questions of life, as one colleague has defined culture at one point in time, the idea of culture has a huge impact. It has a huge impact because it determines how we take on information, how we digest information, how we communicate. It looks at what we focus on in our business, and therefore it determines whether or not I can connect well with a person that I'm supposed to work with. Is what's important to them reasonably important to me? Can I connect to that? Or are they looking to achieve something that I don't find worthwhile? In which case my culture may be different from theirs, and in which case I should probably have the guts to say, look, I'm not sure I'm a good fit for this situation. Now, we can add the intercultural dimension to that, because that always is part of, speaking about culture. And we know there are, fantastic writers that look at intercultural dimensions, and they will suggest that there are certain ways of doing things in every national culture. And then, therefore, if you have let's say, a high power distance, for instance, as one measure of cultures,
right?
The higher the power distance, the more it will be difficult to establish a peer-to-peer conversation between coach and coachee, because the notion is that my coach is supposed to be more experienced, he's supposed to be an elder, I'm supposed to listen to their advice and do what they say. Well, that's not what coaching is about. So if there is less power distance, I would think that helps. You can look at individualism and collectivism as another measure and say, if a culture is highly individualistic, that has an impact on how people move away from a mainstream, where if a culture is very collectivistic, it may be very difficult for people to break away from what's expected of them. Can people in both types of cultures be coached? Absolutely. However, the approach will be different.
How fascinating. What a great response. Thank you. So now I'm going to move on to the next generation of leaders that are now entering the corporate world, and they're getting into leadership roles, whether it's the millennials or the Gen Zs. They come in with a very, very fresh mindset, and people of my vintage, are trying to understand their imperatives. And I think they're doing an amazing job in terms of taking charge of companies. My question to you is, how do organizations prepare their own mentoring and coaching norms to be able to support these young leaders?
That's a great question. Rather unsurprisingly. My sense is that the answer will very much depend on which industry you're in. So very simply speaking, if your business is a business to consumer setup, the impact of Gen Z and millennials will probably be very different than if your business is a B2B. And then depending on who are the customers of your B2B or B2C business. So if you're in fast-moving consumer goods, I would imagine that the impact of Gen Z and millennials is much bigger than if you're in a second-tier supplier to the automotive industry.
Correct.
So in other words, it will very much depend upon the customers, the clients, the consumers that an organization addresses. And the more it addresses the Gen Z and millennial generations, the more I think it is obliged to take into account the way that Gen Z and millennials will lead, will want to work, will want to have an impact, and that has to be respected in the way that they're being supported. Now, at the same time, looking at those sort of B2B organizations, they may not have a demand side issue, if you wanted to call it that way. They sure have a supply side issue, because the Gen Z and millennial people who leave university or business school and they want to get their first job or their second job, if they find an organization that isn't ready to accommodate them and isn't ready to accommodate their their values and what's important to them,
Mm.
well, they will opt to go and work elsewhere.
Correct.
So even if your market perspective is, look, this is not really important to us, on the supply side, where they look at being an attractive employer, it has a huge impact.
Absolutely.
And people haven't understood that yet, as far as I can tell from my experience. Now, I may have a limited perspective, but what I see suggests to me that they haven't yet understood.
Wonderful. So, Rolf, I'm going to now move to the next segment of our conversation. My viewers and listeners love to get to know my guest a little better. So I've got 2 or 3 questions for you, which I call my personal questions to you.
Okay.
For a person like you who spent so much time in consulting and industry, and now as a managing partner of executive and team mentoring organization, what would you say are 3 key milestones or pivot points in your life or your career?
Well, there are the obvious personal milestones. Like a personal milestone, the first moment I met my current wife, who's my first wife. So that may make that even more important. Yeah. Or those moments when our children were born. I guess those would be highlights for everyone. So I guess that needs to be mentioned. Now, from a more professional perspective, those moments that were truly formative were very early on as a student. I worked at the large student organization ISEC, and we were organizing a large conference in Germany in 1991, and we had 450 people from 72 countries attending, and I was one of the team leaders in this whole endeavor. And towards the end, I was sitting there thinking, wow, you've got these 10 volunteers who have all given 10 days of their lives to this endeavor without being paid. Why did they do that? What drives people to do what they do? And that was a pivot in the sense that I said, okay, now I've seen this, but what's the background? What's the theory to that? And that created a shift in the focus of my university studies. And set me on the course, which I'm still on, and I'm still learning and finding out. So that clearly was a big pivot. The other big pivot was in 2005, when in this pharmaceutical firm, I was on the executive committee. We started a management appraisal. After the restructure, things had fallen into place, and we said, okay, let's see the bench strength of the organization. And I went first to be appraised because I was supposed to be an observer for all the other members of the executive committee to be observed later on and assessed later on. And it was a 3-hour experience with 2 consultants, and they provided feedback, and they said, here are your strengths and here are your development areas, and you've got one problem. And I said, so what is that? If it's only one problem, I can probably deal with it. And they said, look, you haven't yet figured out whether you want to be an executive or a consultant.
Oh, wow.
As long as you don't figure that out, you will not be successful in either.
Wow.
And I keep this piece of paper to this day because it's been probably the biggest pivot in my professional life.
Yeah, wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. So I've got time for one more question. And this is for all the young people who will be watching us and listening to us. What would your advice be, Rolf, to a young individual starting off on her or his journey, either in the corporate world or as an entrepreneur?
Well, I'm afraid I'm going to say a few things that other people would say as well. Now that basically means if there's overlap, you're probably onto something. It's really this idea of finding out what you're really passionate about, finding your passion, staying true to your passion is really important. The other thing I found is that the ability to show curiosity, the ability to want to learn, to find out, to understand, to not believe that your view of the world is the only view of the world is going to be massively important. What I find when I work with people, I very often look at what's their degree of awareness for who they are and what happens around them. So building that self-awareness is a key thing that I would invite everyone to look at and pay attention to.
Wonderful. What great advice. Rolf, on that note, thank you so much for speaking to me. Thank you for talking to me about your incredible journey across multiple organizations and finally as managing partner of Bernotat and CIE. Thank you for talking to me at such length about executive coaching, executive mentoring, about millennials, how organizations are preparing to get ready to welcome and support young leaders who are now all over the world in multiple organizations. Thank you again for speaking to me, and good luck.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.